Okay. So, I think one of the most valuable things is to be able to answer your questions. To just, I don't believe in the term safe spaces. I teach, I don't ever use it because I don't feel like you can ever secure a space enough that it's safe. It's only as safe as the people are in it. It's only as safe as you feel like it's safe because my safe might be not be the same as your safe. So I don't ever use that terminology. But what I can tell you is that I'm a safe person, and this is a safe space in terms of being able to ask the questions that you can't ask other people in other places. This is what I do for a living. So there's nothing that will shock me. It's nothing that I probably haven't heard. You won't be judged for the questions that you ask. This is a place where you can ask me the things that you don't feel comfortable asking other places. And I really encourage you to do that because you are absolutely not allowed to go ask anybody and next to you in line at the grocery store. But you certainly can ask here and get an answer, get the best answer that I have for whatever you ask. So please feel safe to do that. This isn't a space about judging people. You don't know what you don't know. And often there isn't a great vehicle to ask outside of like throwing something up on Facebook and hoping it doesn't, go viral and cause a controversy. Um, so this is that. Hi, everyone. If I don't know you personally, my name is Tamara Leigh. I'm originally from upstate New York. Now I live down in Florida. And I'm an educator, I'm an activist, I'm an advocate. I've gotten the unique privilege to be able to go into universities and businesses and consult on projects to make sure that inclusion and intersectionality is focused there. We sort of are in the unique ability that myself and all the people that I work with are all Black or brown, queer or trans. And so we can talk about things from like a BIPOC perspective as well as a LGBTQ perspective because very few of us are one thing anymore. And so it's important to be able to talk about things from a rounded intersectional perspective. So I love that we can do that in the spaces that we're in because there's layers to that intersectionality that change the way you experience the world. And so it's important to be able to sort of figure that into every conversation. Like I said, the first time we did this, it went amazing. The content that I had fit perfectly in the time that we had and left about a half hour that we could just chat, um, ask questions, talk about the things that we already went through. If there are situations that you've been in that maybe you weren't sure how to navigate, if there are things that you're worried about, situations that you may be in. Um, that you don't know how to address or you don't feel like you necessarily addressed the best you could have, or you're concerned about things that you're stepping into, that's a perfect time for us to talk about all of those things. And like I said, I hope that throughout the time we become more comfortable together so you feel comfortable saying and asking and doing the things. Again, stop me, flag me down. If there's anything that you want more clarity about, or is something that is super interesting to you, and you're like, okay, wait, I want to learn more. And if we go through all of these things and then later, because that's a thing, you're like mixing the spaghetti sauce later on, and they're like, oh my goodness, I should have said this. I'm gonna give everybody my email address, and please feel free to reach out whenever to ask me anything that you missed or thought about later, or even things that you encounter in the future that you're like, hey, I could use a little bit of direction. Please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to do that. Um, so we went through the who am I. Who are you is the next question. I'm not going to make everybody introduce themselves because I feel like it matters, but it doesn't matter because the things that we have in common, we all have in common. And I'm very rarely worried about the people that are here. It's more so the people that don't take the opportunity to be in spaces like this that concern me. So the fact that so many people did is amazing to me, because it's important. And these conversations are hard. There's nothing about this that's easy for anybody on any side of the road, from any political facet, from any race, gender, orientation, gender identity, any of the above. These are just hard conversations that we don't have. And that's why they continue to be hard and why they get harder. And in the context of what we're talking about tonight, I'm going to talk about some things that are just sort of general things, and then I'm going to go into things that are more specific to Kamala, and then I'm going to go into some things that are more specific to the campaign in general. Because the thing about this thing is it's so incredibly important that it's bringing people out of the woodwork that may have never thought about being engaged in politics before. And so many different sets of people are so invested in the result because their lives are so threatened by what happens here that you will be in rooms and spaces with people that you've never encountered before. And what does that look like and what does it feel like? So we're kind of going to go through all of those different spaces throughout the stretch of the conversation. If you need to get up and stretch or run to the bathroom, please feel free to do that. There's no test at the end of this. You won't be quizzed, I promise. Um, so I just want everybody to be comfortable. Having to do the PP dance halfway through and not being is not good for helping you pay attention. So please feel free to do whatever you need to do. I want to start this by saying, first of all, I am absolutely resoundingly, without any question, voting for Harris Wells. There's no question. And I don't need to tell you that, and it shouldn't matter. But I want to tell you that because some things you hear may make you think that I'm not. Um, but I think that it's incredibly important to be honest about where the people that you are going to encounter may be coming from and how the things that you or I might say to them as being sure and knowing that this is important, um, how that can bring up conflict because of historical context that you may not even be aware of. And so I always think I don't want people when you like we're so ready, right? Ready to like battle the people and take them down. And this is so important. And how could you not understand? Um, and that's awesome. Like I actually got into a very interesting conversation with somebody last night because they had made a post in one of the Harris for President groups that was about how she had been so incredibly impactful and important for the queer community and has always done such justice by them. And that's not entirely true. There are some iffy legislative things that she has done around the trans community. And so you cannot say, well, you can, you should not say that she has been the shining jewel of LGBTQ activism when the T is a very important part of those letters. And if there hasn't, and there's great ways to educate people around the fact that she has done much better with that since she's been in the vice presidency than she did when she was representing California, that she clearly has engaged a lot of trans leadership. So hopefully that means she's also being educated through this process and can do better in the future. And that she, I think through the convention, will be introducing a whole campaign or a whole platform of things that can make the trans community feel more comfortable with what's going to happen that is different than ignoring them and their interests entirely by saying, yes, she's certainly like she has been the princess of equity when that's not necessarily true. But again, just hearing that, the first thing your body will tighten up, like your chest will tighten up because the first thing you feel when you hear things like that is, oh no, this person isn't voting for her. And what's that mean? And what's that going to happen? And we have to change it. And oh no, oh no, no. And so I want you to know that as I'm talking about these things, I absolutely am. So you can skip all of that reaction altogether and just sort of hear what I'm saying and why without feeling like you need to defend the position because I absolutely am 100% super excited to vote for her and am praying to whatever deity that I can find that that is what happens at the end of the day because I think it is so important to us. And I think that the opposite vote is so incredibly detrimental to the queer and trans community that there's really no option in my mind. But like I said, I don't have to tell you that, but I want you to because I don't want you to feel like you need to defend that point. It's not what it's for. It's just to kind of give you some insight historically where other people might be coming from, which should help you to be able to potentially help them to see something else and other options on the table. Okay, so just wanted to get that out first. So the first thing we're going to do is some historical context. Some of this you may be aware of, some of you maybe not. So we'll just kind of like I always feel like you teach to like third grade and then hope that everybody falls somewhere in there from third grade on. Um, It's exceptionally easy for I think everybody, honestly. It's exceptionally easy to think about things like enslavement like they were a bajillion years ago. It is incredibly easy, especially if you don't have personal experiences that help you to see how those things still affect people the way that they do, to feel like slavery was eons ago with the pilgrims and, you know, in 1492. Like, it's easy for your brain to do that. The reality is that chattel slavery lasted for 400 years and it ended 165 years ago. And if you factor in Jim Crow and all of the things that happened during that time, it's a much shorter span. So now you're talking 120, 140 years ago, that's like our grandparents. Like that's not, if you think about people that were alive 120, 140 years ago, that's literally people that we know and have touched and have spent time with. Like that's not 100 generations back, like it's very recent. So the idea that we have somehow shook the remnants of those things in not even half the amount of time that it took for them to happen is not logical. But it's the thing our brain does because it has to. Cognitive dissonance is one of my favorite terms on earth. When I learned about it, it changed my entire perspective on everything. Because, and the best example of it that I've ever heard was if you think about like your grandfather or your great grandfather, if you got the opportunity to know them, and how they like taught you how to ride a bike and, bought you the best Christmas present every year and always had that like special candy that you loved stuck in their pocket when they came to see you and snuck it to you so your parents wouldn't see and took you to, you had this special show that you watched together every time you went to visit or the summers you spent there. And this person has this almost mythical, magical quality for you because they were so significant to who you were and loved you so much and showed it in all these wonderful, incredible ways. And then you find out that person was a member of the KKK. Like, your body tenses up when you hear such a thing. And that's what cognitive dissonance is. Your body and your brain can't possibly reconcile the fact that someone that was so kind and loving and wonderful to you could have been hateful and horrible to someone else. It's very similar, like the Black community's relationship with the police. If you grew up that the police were there to help you when you heard them, if you were in trouble, that meant that help had arrived and you were going to be okay, that it was like a calming force because of something's you're calling them because something's wrong obviously and they've finally gotten here to save you, help you, rescue you, is very different than most people in the Black community. I have a license, have had one since I was 16. All my papers are in order. My car is registered and is in great shape and is brand new and all of the things. And when a cop car pulls up behind me, especially when I have my two teenage Black sons in the car with me, I am instantly terrified. Instantly terrified because I know there is a distinct possibility that depending on who walks up to my window, that one of us will not see live past that interaction. So I am instantly filled with fear, even if it's just a teeny tiny infraction. Now, I've had cops in my lifetime, in my own personal experience, I've had cops that have left me off of tickets, that have flirted with me when they got to the window, that have laughed and joked, that have let me go, that have said, like, you're driving too fast. Like, let's get it together. Or take that, go get that tail light fixed and bring us a little ticket and you won't get whatever. I've had cops that have been very kind to me. I've had friends that were police, but the legacy of violence is so strong that it can't possibly overpower the immense fear that I have and the incredible amount of love that I have for my children to not be terrified in that moment. And I think that that's an easy, like visceral one to hold on to, that something may make zero sense to you, but somehow that can make sense to you and what your brain has to do because if your experience your entire life was one thing, it's easy to feel like someone's not making any sense when they're telling you something. Your brain, and like I said, cognitive dissonance, your brain wants to do that. It wants to give you every reason to support that what you know to be true is true and the other person is overreacting or there's an explanation or what our brains are designed to do to keep us safe, to keep us sane, to keep us functioning. And the fact of the matter is, you can be in the exact same situation and have two completely different sets of reactions and feelings around it that are all completely valid. But like I think real life examples like that are incredibly important to like hold on to in those moments that someone is telling you something that you just don't get and makes zero sense to you. I think those real moments and those explanations are so incredibly important to hold on to be like, okay, this might be one of those times. Like, I don't get it, but it's okay that I don't get it. That doesn't make it any less true. I swear to you that I have used the phrase two things can be true at the same time more times in the past 3 months than I think I've ever used it in the duration of my lifetime. Like, that has been my lesson recently. I know because it has come up in conversations of all different kinds constantly. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you've seen me post it more than once. Like, it's literally been coming up over and over again. So I know it's an important lesson for me that I need to make sure that I pass on when I talk to folks because it's true. And whenever we feel passionately about something, it's even harder to see or feel why someone else could be coming from such a different angle. And the honest to goodness truth is, even if you're talking to people from the far right, they may be nasty and awful and horrible and saying inflammatory, seemingly insane things. But in the purpose of campaign season, it's so important to remember that some people are miseducated, some people's experience backs up the things that they're saying, and a lot of times it's ignorance or fear. That doesn't change it not being okay, but it may help you to hold your peace to some degree, to one, preserve your sanity, but also to not engage in stuff that's just nasty because that doesn't help her. Like us being nasty back doesn't help her. Doesn't help her, it doesn't help us, it rarely will help them. And so, like I said, those very real kind of concrete examples are kind of a thing that you can hold in the back of your head to just be like, okay, this is probably one of those, and it's probably time to disengage. Or have real live facts in the ready to be able to present clear and factual information and then let them do with that what they wish. Um, Joy DeGruy is like my academic uh crush, I guess. She is so incredibly amazing. If you're not familiar with her work, she created the whole concept behind post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I had the honor when I was in Rochester, New York, to be able to sit in on like a 4-day intensive training with her where I like to think I'm very educated and know a lot of things. And she told me stories that I had never heard before that were so incredibly jarring about the things that happened during enslavement that never left me. That were so strong like to the point that I had to like go outside and like take my shoes off and put my feet in the grass, just like ground myself because I was so rocked by them. I had no idea that DeGrew, let me write it for you. You are training as best. Okay. I there must have been a Zoom update because I'm seeing all kinds of new little messages that have never popped up for me before. I believe I believe that's how you oh, they, spell check really, really wants to change the spelling of this lady's name. Joy de you leave it there. Yeah, okay. There you go. Um And if you're interested in her work, she's fascinating. She offers a lot of trainings, and classes. She travels all over the world. Her books are amazing. There's a workbook that goes with it that you can actually do exercise. She's incredible. But she developed this theory, and the theory is that she has all this scientific and psychological and um, academic evidence to show that if you ever watched the documentary 16th on Netflix, if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it. It talks all about like the school to prison pipeline and how all these huge corporations fund all these things that we don't realize and how it is basically acting out structures of oppression all over again. But same general concept. She has found all this evidence and done all this research because she's actually a researcher by trade. Um, about how so many of the things that happened during enslavement are carried as like generational trauma through the generations and they surface in all kinds of ways today. I worked with the University of Rochester on this we developed a curriculum for med students about the 1619 project. That's another great resource. And like I said, I'll send you a list with all these on there if you don't catch any of them. Um, 1619 project, which again shows all kinds of things that happen in our day and age that source back to different things that happen with enslavement. And it was interesting. I was once in the middle of teaching a workshop and had this like discovery in the middle of teaching it, which completely threw me off because it was like profound for me inside my own head. And I was trying to like process all that and still talk to people. Is that a great example of this is because it's somewhat nature and somewhat nurture. And so a great example of this is if you go to a store with your child, right? So you may see a white mom go to store with their child and their kid is picking up stuff and looking at it and asking questions and, you know, if you're a mom, some days that works and some days doesn't, and you definitely don't want your kid to break anything or be acting like a wild animal in the store. That's kind of across the board mom stuff. But in general, you often see white moms a lot more allowing of their kids being inquisitive. And you may witness in a store a black mom or an immigrant mom, a mom of color, be telling their kids to like, don't touch anything, don't pick anything up, don't look at anything, yelling and screaming at their kid, leave it alone, absolutely not, dragging them out of the store. And a lot of times, white moms will see that and it's like a very clutch their pearls moment. Oh my God, this child wasn't even doing anything. Like, why would they act like that with them? Like, oh my goodness. And it occurred to me as I was talking about this for some reason in the context of the workshop that we were having. Keep your hands in your pocket. That's right. Um, right. I didn't realize until that moment as I was teaching the workshop that Black children are not gifted with the allowance of curiosity. White children who are curious in school, at home, in the world are usually praised. They're considered smarter, precocious, more advanced. That inquisitiveness is usually nurtured and fed because it's looked at as a quality opposed to a detriment. Whereas in Black households and Black children in the school system, in the world, in families, that's why a lot of kids end up getting diagnosed with different behavioral conditions that they may or may not have, are medicated. And that's statistically true that Black and brown children are often diagnosed with things much more often than other groups of children. And so there has been a fear passed down over the years that if your kid asks too many questions or draws too much attention to themselves or says too much or does too much, that they may be labeled, they may be medicated. One, but let's pull it back even farther. Once upon a time, if you were a Black child in a store, if you broke something, if you touched something, if they thought you were stealing, you would likely be murdered. They would kill your child. They would kill your child. In that second, the store owner might pull out a shotgun and shoot your kid. Or they may let you go, and then later on, a group of People with shotguns may drag your child out of your home and you may never see them again. And so often, if a mom was in the store with her child and they by some chance ended up, breaking something or touching something that they weren't supposed to, they would beat their child in the store because then the store owner could see them handling it. Yes, terrible. You're so bad. You're so awful. How could you do that? Beat the child right in the middle of the store because that may have saved their life. That store owner seeing that child be treated cruelly by their parent may have saved their child's life. Because if the store owner felt like they needed to address it, that might have been the end of their child's life. Now, does the mom at Walmart in 2024 know that? Probably not. She has probably never learned about those things. They don't teach them in school. Parents don't pass those stories along because they're incredibly painful. But they know that the person who loved and raised them interacted with them in that way. So it must be what you're supposed to do with your children to raise them right. So this is a period of a kind of behavior that's now been passed down generationally all the way back 400 years that you have no idea where it came from. You have no idea why you do it. The people looking at you have no idea why you do it. But that very well may be where that came from. And so I say all that to say, not that that isn't an important point within itself, that if those things like that have carried through all these generations and all of that time, the relationships that people have and how they relate to each other cannot be shaken and disappear in that amount of time either. The way that Black women relate to white men who, for 400 years plus, I mean, like, that's why Juneteenth exists. Slavery ended and people were still enslaved because no one told them that they could leave. So, at least 400 years, they had been getting beaten, raped, bought, sold, fondled, abused, served white men. So, and in the reverse, that is also how white men were raised and socialized to treat people of color as property. Eh, So, like, no matter how educated you are, no matter how much you know it's wrong, no matter how much you abhor the idea and the structure of slavery, you can't shake those things completely. They come back. That's why you will see a video of someone that you have experienced your whole entire life. They're wonderful. You've worked with them before. You've never seen a bit of ounce of racism whatsoever, prejudice at all. And then you all of a sudden catch a video of them on TikTok, like saying some sort of racial slur. Because sometimes in the heat of emotion, all of a sudden those buried things bubble up to the surface faster than you even could catch it. So this is important to mention and to talk about in this conversation because those same very complicated dynamics exist between Black women and white women, and we do not talk about them. There was always a very complicated, back in enslavement, a very complicated and complex relationship between white women and Black women specifically, but Black folks in general. First of all, there were many, many white women that were very much in favor of slavery, one, but in a time when women had very little power, they couldn't own property, they weren't in charge of much, as we know, when one group is oppressed, unfortunately, that often slides downhill. So there's all kinds of historical documentation that shows that often white women were extremely cruel to the people that their families enslaved because they were abused and tortured, and so that was the only people that they had power over. And there also was very, very complicated relationships between white women and Black women because whether a Black woman who was enslaved was being raped or not, This is a woman that's sleeping with their husband. And so many white women really struggled with having this woman that they know is bearing their husband's children right under their nose, possibly living inside their house. There was jealousy there. If there was an incredibly beautiful slave on the plantation, they were jealous. And so, no matter how much we try to be in the moment and live in the here and now, those things are things that we carry in our DNA. Trauma changes your brain, it changes your DNA, it changes how you relate to people. And there's all kinds of evidence to show that, like, secondary and so on trauma still affects you nearly to the degree to the people that it happened to. So all those things that we heard about or didn't hear about or don't even know about, those exist in us somewhere. And we sometimes think that, and slavery only affected Black folks. But like all of those weird psychological things that such a vicious the things that you had to convince yourself were okay back then in order to live the way society lived, that does something. I mean, you wanna talk about cognitive dissonance. Like, if you were a kind person that lived during enslavement, but everyone in society owned slaves, chances are you did too, whether you believed in the structure or not, and so the things that you had to convince yourself to believe that it was okay are pretty deep, and that's not something that you can shake in a couple generations, and it's not something that you can shake in 165 years. So all of that stuff lives in us somewhere, and it may often affect how you relate to people in ways that you don't even realize. So it's just important to, like, know and acknowledge and keep in mind. So this is the part of the conversation, um, that actually, no, I'm not gonna go into that one yet. We'll talk about feminism. Let's jump in history a little bit. So feminism. Um, Another one of those things that often, white women and women of color look at and feel differently and relate differently to and have had different experiences of, because widely, women of color have not felt included in the feminist movement whatsoever. Um, I had gotten the opportunity to the Philharmonic Orchestra, where I lived, did this thing that I didn't even understand when it was happening, but it ended up being extraordinary. They interviewed 5 women in our city and, about our relationship with, like, Susan B. Anthony um, and what we thought about suffrage times and how it impacted our lives and whatever, because we were doing, significant things in our city and whatever. And so they took our interviews and had actors act them out, like our answers, the things that we said, they pretended to be us. They played us on stage while the orchestra was in the background. And so you have these 4, I think it was 5 or 6 of us. You have these 5 other people that go through their whole skits and the people act them out, and it's really phenomenal and the music is dramatic. And then you got to mine, and I talked about how Susan B. Anthony purposely and directly refused to campaign for the freedom of Black women. She was not interested. She said no. She would fight for women, but that did not include Black women. And that was feminism at the very beginning of feminism. And it changed, but then it didn't. Because although I think feminism was willing to accept Black women, feminism as a movement was willing to accept Black women that supported it, but that often meant that issues that only or much more dramatically affected Black and brown women were pushed to the side because it was like, yeah, that's important, but, like, we have to fight the big fight right now, and then we'll get to that. Like, that's you, but, like, what we really need to do right now is worry about this thing. So you hold on to that, and we'll get to that later. Like, right now, we need to not be divisive and worry about those things. Like, we need to fight for the main thing right now, and we get that, and then we'll circle back to those things, except the circle back never happens. And so this campaign has turned into, for a lot of people, this like super exciting feminist movement. Except that's not nearly as exciting for a lot of the people that experience sort of the dark side of what feminism looked like, when their needs and their concerns and how open they and welcoming spaces were to them when they came into it. So, yet another thing to kind of just feather to stick in your cap to remember when, you're encouraging this sort of like sisterhood of things when that hasn't been everybody's experience with it. So, to that end, I'm going to read a passage from a activist named Kinaga Yamata Taylor from the July 2020 New Yorker, I believe. And I'll send you this link so you can read the whole thing because I'm only going to read a little piece of it. Because more than anything, I just want you to hear her talk about her experience with the movement. She's actually talking about a much larger, broader concept that is very important. So read the article, but for this purpose, we're just going to hear this little piece of it. So, um, I first encountered the Kambachi River Collective statement in a women's studies class in my second year of college at SUNY Buffalo. We had been reading about divisions within the feminist movement in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and the emergence of a body of thought captured in the framework of Black feminism. The Combahee River Collective was a small organization, but it involved some of the luminaries of Black feminism, Barbara Smith and her twin sister Beverly Smith, as well as Demita Frazier, Cheryl Clark, Akasha Hall, Margot Akwaza Ray, Curlane McCrae, and Audre Lorde. Equally dismayed by the direction of the feminist movement, which they believed to be dominated by middle-class white women, and the suffocating masculinity in Black nationalist organizations, they set out to formulate their own politics and strategies in response to their distinct experiences as Black women. But they were not only reacting to the deficits they found in organizations led by white women and Black men, they were also inspired by the national liberation and anti colonial movements from the Algerian struggle against the French occupation to the Vietnamese resistance to the American War. The CRC saw themselves as revolutionaries whose aspirations far exceeded women's rights. They aspired to overthrow capitalism. The Black women of the CRC were not the first to break with white feminist and Black nationalist organizations. In many ways, they were built on the work of the Third World Women's Alliance, which was an outgrowth of the Black Women's Liberation Committee, a caucus of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. What distinguished the CRC from those groups was the explanatory power of their statement, which was first collected in Zyla Enstein's anthology, Capitalist Patriarchy and the Case for Socialist Feminism, in 1978. Reading the statement for the first time, two things struck me. The first was its effort to combine socialist politics with feminism. I had been a socialist since I was 14, and in the groups that I had become active with, feminism was always painted as hostile to socialism. As it was explained to me, feminists saw the world as divided between men and women and not between classes. The Combahee statement obliterated that premise. Theoretically, rich and strategically nimble, it imagined a course of politics that could take Black women from the margins of society to the center of revolution, because Black women were among the most marginalized people in this country. Their political struggles brought them into direct conflict with the intertwined malignancies of capitalism, racism, sexism, and poverty. Thus, the women of the CRC believed that if Black women were successful in their struggles and movements, they would have impact far beyond their immediate demands. As they put it, if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. So, like I said, that's a piece of a much larger piece, which obviously goes in directions that don't have a whole lot of relevance for what we're talking to today. But I just thought it was such a powerful statement to see why these like side organizations popped out, because they just didn't see themselves represented in the mainstream. I mean, like, it's funny to say mainstream when they're but, like, that says something right there. Like, these are offshoots fighting, you know, traditional structure, but they don't even see themselves reflected in those. And so that means something else has to be born to have any reflection of their needs and their values and their struggles and the oppression that they face. And I scarily see a lot of that happening through the Harris Walz campaign, not having anything to do with them, but these groups that are forming in order to get them elected are very, very middle class white women, which great, awesome, love to see it. However, their experiences are much different than most other people's in this country. And white women have also not learned how to take a back seat to Black and brown women who may have something very important to offer. They may have been socialized to take backseat to men their entire life, but they have never been encouraged to be silent and to listen and be led by Black and brown women. Okay, good. It's just never happened. There's not structures where that has taken place. And so it's really easy for these groups to turn into that. And it's awful. It shouldn't happen, but in the larger sense, it also could greatly impact the results of the campaign because we need all of us. Like, we all have to show up for this. So if these individual groups start alienating groups of people whose votes are desperately important in this, then what? Because the honest to God fact is, statistically, white women are the least likely to vote in their own interest of any other group. They're more likely to vote with their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their partners, whatever. Statistically, the least likely to vote for their own interests. So if we're only depending on that one group of people to make this thing happen and alienating all these other people whose votes and voices are so incredibly important and impactful and necessary, that's a scary proposition because the crazies are going to show up. And so all of us have to show up in order for something different to happen here. But if these groups lose sight, aren't aware of the historical context, but then beyond that, are doing things that are basically mimicking what has happened in movements of the past, which is completely alienating and pushing out these groups of people. Because the thing about it is, like, these groups took years and years and years and decades to form alternative groups and organize. There's not enough time for that. If people get alienated in these groups, there's a couple months to bring them in the fold or push them out of it. There's not enough time to make amends. So you gotta not make the mistakes in the first place because there just isn't enough time to pull people back. My dogs have a love-hate relationship with Amazon, so. Okay. So this is the part I kinda skipped over, skipped ahead a little bit, but to sort of drive this point home, I guess. I think just about everybody is familiar with the man versus bear controversy that happened, what, 6 months or so ago? So, if by chance you live under a rock and hadn't heard about the man versus bear thing, I don't even know where it started, to be honest. But it sort of spread like wildfire that women started making videos and posts and going on social media and all the things talking about how they would, if in a forest, if they would rather encounter, excuse me, if they would rather encounter a man or a bear. And resoundingly, women said the bear. Resoundingly, which sent many, many men into an absolute tizzy and tailspin because they couldn't understand for the life of them what would ever possess a woman to feel safer with a wild animal, a bear, than a man. Like, they just couldn't get it. Like, couldn't it made no sense to them. It just didn't nothing compute. It just didn't compute. Just they made no I mean, I saw vicious arguments on social media. I think I even saw them, like, it made it to the news. Like, it was like national news that these conversations were happening, and men just did not understand. I saw a couple men, they're like, "Okay, this happened, now I get it," whatever, but, like, as a rule, most men could not possibly understand why that would be a thing, why they could see themselves one way and someone else could see themselves completely different and not safe in their space. And so my message from that is make sure that you don't become the man in the man versus bear scenario. Because what was less publicized is after the man versus bear conversation happened, someone started the dialogue of if you were in a workspace, which for all intents and purposes, a lot of this campaign stuff is more of a workspace than a social one or even a, like a personal one because we don't know a lot of these people. So it probably relates closest to a workspace. The conversation kind of went in a direction where they were asking Black women if they would rather be in a, they picked the bear in the woods, but in a workspace, would they be more comfortable with a white man or any man? I guess it wasn't a white man, any man or a white woman. And by just as much of a resounding answer, it was not the white woman that they picked because of the things that they had experienced in workplace scenarios with the white women that were their coworkers, that they were supervisors, that were their administration. And so, based on that, I think a lot of the same shock that men felt when they heard about the man versus bear equation, I think a lot of white women would feel the same way about that answer. But it just shows how easily, it's like you've heard the quote say, "When the bear has the gun." Well, it's the same idea. You could very easily become the man in the man versus bear situation and not realize it. And I think that that's another one of those things that you can kind of hold on to in understanding that no matter how well intended you are, and I'm sure many men in many situations think they're doing the right thing or they're well intended. I think we've all been mansplained. I think that we've all been talked to like we don't know what we're talking about to by a man. I think we've all been like patted on our head and patronized and coddled and all of those things. And often Black women are in a space, Black and brown women end up in spaces with white women that they feel the exact same way. And it's not easy, that cognitive dissonance, that magic word, pops back up that it's not always easy to understand that and to see that. But if you understand why it exists in the man versus bear situation, it's a lot easier to understand why it exists with white women and Black women. And again, on top of that, we're bringing all of that cultural socialization and history and trauma from 400 years worth of enslavement, where white women did not have to respect Black women. There was absolutely no requirement whatsoever. They weren't workers, they were producers of children, but outside of that, they were disposable. And even though white women may not always attach themselves to understand that that's still a thing, it's still a thing. And so again, like when you get into a situation where someone tries to, and it's a thing that you can't see. It's usually a thing that someone else has to tell you. You can't see it in your own behavior because it's not your experience. You may be very well intentioned and have no idea that this thing is happening, but you can't see it until somebody tells you. And that usually doesn't end well for the teller. Usually they're not in an administrative position, and even if they are, there's somebody above them who doesn't relate to that, and then they risk losing their jobs, they risk demotion and whatever, they've all of a sudden become difficult and angry, and that angry Black woman trope is a cuss word that I wanna insert there. I have experienced it over and over again, and it's so incredibly frustrating. There is a study that they put, Black women and white women, they only use their voices so that they were only based on nothing visual, just the idea that this is a Black woman and this is a white woman, and you could hear them. And they had them say a series of things, some with like an angry voice, some with a calm voice, some very neutral, had them all say the same things with the same tone and inclination, volume, all the things. A group of people, Black women, white women, men, all children, all different microcosm of people listen to these sounds. And overwhelmingly, the white woman was perceived as having been upset about the situation, and the black woman is perceived that it's her personality. Overwhelmingly. So the white women in the study, it was assumed, there was the perception of every single microcosm of people that you could possibly imagine that she was upset because they could hear the upset in her voice or hear the upset in her words, that something had happened around her that upset her. She was responding to the situation. Whereas overwhelmingly, it was perceived that Black women were angry people, that it was a personality trait that they were displaying opposed to being upset by a situation that was happening. And that's where that angry Black woman trope kicks in. And it's strictly based in all these hundreds of years of programming of what and who Black women are. And so it's really easy to be in these groups of people that are overwhelmingly white women, and a Black woman brings up some sort of dissenting opinion of some kind or another, which very well may be very valuable because it's something based on her experience, which a whole bunch of other people will relate to, and that is somehow being missed because all of us have blind spots. Like, we live off of our own experience. We see what we see, we know what we know. Inevitably, I'm not gonna be able to relate to everything that has to do with who you are, and you aren't gonna be able to relate to everything I see and do and experience as who I am. Inevitably, that's true for absolutely everyone. And so, in those blind spots, that's why it's awesome that there's a bunch of different people that come to the table. No matter how hard you work or how educated you are, if there's not a whole bunch of people at the table, you're gonna miss stuff because everybody has those blind spots. So you try to cover all your bases, so hopefully somebody will see something that somebody else didn't see. But in a room that is majority white women who have not the same experience, but many common experiences, it's really easy for somebody to come in and say, "But wait, hold on a minute," and then be absolutely obliterated by the people in the room. And when she tries to defend her position or explain her position or say more, she has all of a sudden become that trope. She's so angry. She's so rude. We're all here to get this thing done. And she obviously just wants to argue about it because everybody else in the room agrees. It can happen so easy and so fast. Oh, somebody else is here. It can happen so incredibly quickly. And so hopefully this conversation, again, I'm never as worried about the people in the room as I am the people that aren't in the room. Because my hope is that when you see one of those things happening, this will pop in your head and you can be the one person that's like, wait a minute, I don't think she sounds angry. I think that she has something to say that we didn't consider. So, how about everybody breathe and we back up and let this person come forward and have something to say. And it literally takes one person to disrupt that sort of crowd gang think mentality is really easy, and it happens really fast. And it's so hard to be the person to say something different. But I always encourage people, like when I'm talking to especially people like in when we're talking about like making spaces safer for black and brown or for queer people and trans folks, I often say that, no matter how little privilege you feel like you always have more privilege than someone else. You've been there longer, you know more people, you have more money, you are lighter skinned, you're whatever the case may be. We all carry privilege. And as scared as you are less scared than the person that carries less privilege than you. So be the person that speaks up so they don't have to. And again, I'm not worried about the people in this room, but there's a lot of people that aren't in this room. And so it's incredibly important to like be aware of those things and see them coming and stop it. Because you stopping it will be perceived so much differently. You might say the exact same thing as that person that just spoke, but it will automatically be perceived differently because it's you. So be that person. Okay. Where are we gonna go next? Okay, let's just take a breath because we're gonna shift gears. So everybody just take a breath and feel your body and feel your space and breathe. Shake it off a little bit. This is heavy stuff. So, make sure you're not like gripping desperately at the pen or anything. All right. So how does all these things so a lot of the stuff we've talked about, as I knock the computer across the room. A lot of the things that we've talked about are historical based, like historical context stuff, which I think is important because a lot of the stuff is stuff we just don't know. Don't know, don't realize, don't think about, aren't aware of, whatever. And so it's hard to understand things without understanding where they come from. Like it's just period, no matter what we're talking about. But like what does it have to do? I mean, we've talked probably more so than I did in the first session, honestly, about like how that impacts the campaign. A lot of that we didn't get into to like this part of it. But like now we're going to talk about directly how things like this impact the campaign because I think that's part of why you're here and I also think it's incredibly important because like again, you're going to be in rooms with people that you may not have ever had the opportunity to be in the room with before. There may be people that you just have no other reason to interact with and may never interact with them again, honestly, to be 100% honest with you. Um, and so I think it's incredibly important that we like really like when I teach, I literally don't use like a deck. I build a curriculum specific to whatever audience I'm talking to, because there's nothing worse than sitting through like a seminar or workshop that's very general that you know that somebody has delivered 9,900 times and it has nothing to do with your actual life. Like it's like that 3 hours of your life you're never gonna get back again. Because like what am I supposed to, that's great, and what am I supposed to do with it? So I try to make everything as much as I can correlate to things that people actually experience and give people like tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about the campaign specifically, and then I'm going to actually give you some just things to hold on to, some like suggestions to take with you of things that you might actually be able to use in life, in real life, opposed to all these wonderful quotes and stories that I have for you. So again, to kind of circle back around, like it's incredible. Like people are excited. I don't know the last time I remember folks being this excited, especially all different kinds of people being this excited about a candidate. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. You may have really struggled with Biden's position on Gaza. And so having an option that isn't him is exciting. You may have been concerned about his cognitive ability. So not being him is exciting. It may simply be the fact that we have a viable alternative to Trump, and that's why it's exciting. Like all different people are excited about, and then a lot of people are just super excited that this is a woman. Like huge deal. And then there's people that are excited that it's a Black woman. Like there's a million reasons to be super excited about this thing happening. Because I don't know that many of us thought we'd see it in our lifetime, honestly. And so there's a lot of reasons to be excited. And people are super excited. I mean, like Taylor Swift concert kind of excited. Like people are excited. Um, and so I think that there's a mentality that's growing that's like a we're just gonna like lock arms and do this thing together and we're all in this fight together and yay and whatever. And that is cute, but it doesn't leave space. It doesn't leave space for the very real intersections of people's identities and their experiences, and that everybody might not be as excited, or that people are excited for very different reasons, or they're excited plus comma plus plus plus. um and it's important to talk about that. This is the part that there was one thing that we did that I felt like was in an awkward position that I wanted to switch around from the last time that I did this workshop because it felt like it was awkward. And I think this was it. So I think the first thing I want to go into is like I was in one of the groups, and because I'm in several in different places since I'm attached to all different states and things at this point. Um and there was a whole, like, was a comment and then, like, like, a post and then, like, a bazillion zillion comments. I know you've seen in these groups that, like, all of a sudden one post ends up with, like, 300 comments on it, and it was them talking about how she wears pearls because of Ruth Gator Ginsburg, and that is not true. That's not the truth, And but, like, not only did this one person say it, like, 300 people underneath it co-signed on how it was amazing, and they're putting up memes and, like, pictures that somebody created of, like, Ruth and her side by side and the whatever. That's not accurate. The reason why she wears pearls is because 'cause she's been an AKA since, I think, 1986. Um AKA is the oldest sorority. AKA, Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated is the oldest, Black sorority. Um, she crossed when she was at Howard University, and she is very passionate about that sisterhood. It's a sisterhood that was created because, it was they were in the midst of a fight for civil rights and representation, and they were not
And can I
welcome.
and because sororities like mine wouldn't let black women in.
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely,
why. Yes.
absolutely. They were not included in most educational institutions in general in 1908, first of all, but even then, if they were allowed into the institution, they certainly wouldn't be able to join a fraternity or a sorority. So these groups were formed as a brotherhood and a sisterhood to get them through very difficult oppression and places that they were not welcomed and they were treated very poorly and they did not want them to be. And so Ruth Gator Ginsburg is an incredible person and very, very inspirational. However, just something as simple as that is taking away a piece of her humanity and thus a piece of the humanity of so many other people that are in the room. Because an assumption got made. Because out of other people's experiences, that's the person that they relate to pearls. The pearl is actually an incredibly important, symbol in the D9. All the original sororities and fraternities are a part of an organization, a larger organization called the D9. And, um the pearl, it symbolizes wisdom and all kinds of things. And so most people, not everybody, but most people would automatically think, like, even if I'm not in a sorority, um, but I know that. And having gone to college, I saw that and I knew what a big deal it is. I know people that I worked with that are still so incredibly involved in Greek life. That's how they have, networked and got their jobs. They still go to the meetings. They still travel across the country for conventions every single year. Like, it's a really big part of Black culture. And so to diminish that by assuming that you know where it comes from instead of doing like a simple Google search that will tell you the right answer, because she does not make it a secret that being an AKA is a huge part of her life, and it's so incredibly important to her. Um, so that means not only do you not know about Black culture, you don't know about her. And that's where and, like, the D9, honestly, if she gets elected, it might be the D9 that does it, because there is such a strong loyalty there and support of each other that just I mean, I think that there are 400,000 AKAs alone, not to mention the deltas and the sigmas and all the other sororities and like, if all of them show up alone, that could, at very least, swing a swing state, but could be the reason she wins the election. So, like, the idea it seems simple, but, like, you might just be really excited that she's a woman and not know anything about her. And you also might be really alienating someone who that's also important to, because you put a narrative to it that you made up. That's it was made up. Like, that is a absolute falsehood. It's made up. That's not true. She wore, when she got sworn in as VP, she had her pearls on. Like, there is a significant reason, and in any interview they ask her, that is the answer. And so any other narrative is false. And so things like that are important to who she is. And so if you don't know things like that, you're automatically driving a wedge between you and the people that do. Um, what were the other things in in that who is she category? Okay, so we touched on this a bit earlier, at the very, very beginning. But like there's also a lot of reasons why um, people will and won't support her. And again, this is the part that I prefaced at the beginning that I am absolutely am supportive of her and I am absolutely voting for her, but that doesn't mean that that's true for everybody and there's reasons. And the first thing that you don't wanna do in a time when every vote is so incredibly important jump on and attack people for very valid reasons to them, because their experience may make those reasons very valid. So, like we talked about at the beginning, she has done some pretty awesome things in terms of queer folks. She was doing marriage ceremonies at the very beginning out in California. She has been very supportive. You see her in all kinds of pride parades. She has spoken out about queer rights. But her record on trans justice and trans rights is very shaky. I believe that she has become better educated. I also am the editor of a magazine called Blackout, and we have scheduled an interview on Friday uh with a trans icon um who has come out in support of her and has linked with the National LGBTQ Task Force to be at the convention, and all of the things. And so I think that she is putting herself in position to become better educated, which is exactly what you want people to do. I personally am less concerned with who you were 10 years ago than what you have put yourself in the position to learn and do better about now. And I believe that she knows that she needs all of these people to win above and beyond anything else. And I think that she's doing the work to learn and a lot of this stuff is based in ignorance. And so when you surround yourself around the people that do know and have experienced these things and have conversations with them and they all of a sudden become real people opposed to just causes and ideas and whatever, it changes things. So I believe that she's going to do the work and I believe that probably in the Democratic National Convention she's going to come out with some really strong words about supporting trans rights. I believe that she is because I'm sure her people are smart enough to know that people know that her record around trans rights is not strong. I think that she knows that. I think and hope and believe that she is gonna do better and that she has done the work to get better about that and that she's gonna show us that. And I think you can absolutely educate people about those things and have conversations about those things. But what you can't do is just talk about how she's so amazing for LGBTQ folks when there's a strong T in there that you can't ignore. You cannot do these like blanket statements because like that's what happened with racism. That's what happened with feminism. Like you cannot pretend like it's not real and that these people don't matter. I actually, like I said earlier, I actually got into it a couple days ago. I actually got into it in one of these groups where someone was queer and put up a post about how she had done so much for the queer community. And I commented, well, in reality, she's a little iffy around the trans community, but I really believe that she's gonna change that. I feel like she's mounting up to turn that corner and that she's gonna change that. And she has done some awesome things for the queer community, and I really have hopes that she's gonna do some great things for the trans community as well. In addition to the fact that the opposite end of the spectrum and what we will get if she doesn't get elected is gonna be devastating to the queer and trans communities. So one way or the other, I'm super supportive. However, I'm not going to erase these very real concerns of these very real people because it sounds good, but it's something important to remember and to know and to hold and to make sure that you're not like jumping on people about because it's real. In the same way with the BIPOC community, colorism is a very, very real thing. White people tend to relate better to light skinned people and are less fearful of light skinned people than dark skinned people. What's interesting is I actually see more colorism within Black and Brown communities than outside of them these days. And so the idea that the first Black woman to potentially make it to this high of office is not only exceptionally light skinned, but also biracial is a struggle for people. The fact that Obama, the only other person of color that has been in that office, was biracial and extremely light skinned is a thing. And it is a very real possibility that the people around the person that you're talking to really have an issue with that and will make you feel bad for supporting this person that is extremely light skinned because it just feels like another trick of the establishment to dilute blackness. But that's a very real thing for people. And it's important to acknowledge that and understand it and believe it and understand why people may not be as excited because like that's where we started this part is everybody's super super excited but there's reasons why some people aren't excited that doesn't mean that they still won't vote for her and you can be the person to get them there but it's not going to be by attacking them for things that are very very real for them. Because even though you can be super excited that she's a woman, you can be super excited that she's not Trump, you can be super excited that she's not Biden, that doesn't mean that there aren't very real concerns that people have that are very valid and tied to their history and their experience and the things that are being talked about in their own communities. Like, if nothing else, Trump's campaign isn't stupid because all of the things that I have seen him jump on her for are the things that I've heard people in the Black community say. Those did not come out of thin air. He knows how incredibly important it is for him to pull any and all Black votes that he can, even if it's just that they don't come to the polls because they don't want either one of them. And so the things that he has been saying, the rhetoric that he's been using are things that came directly out of Black communities talking about those things together and with each other. The fact that she's not really Black, the fact that she's biracial, the fact that she all of a sudden turn Black and whatever, like all the nonsense that he says, like those are conversations that I have heard with my contemporaries and my peers in Black and brown communities. So like I said, he might be not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but the people that are around him are because those things are coming straight out of Black communities that he's talking about and that they're using because it's just enough. That soundbite is just enough if it's already something that is you're hearing around you from people you do trust and you do think are gonna tell you the truth. Hearing that little soundbite is just enough to be like, "Okay, well, I wouldn't believe it if he said it, but my barber just said it, or my mom just said it, or my grandmother just brought it up." And now all of a sudden you have all this doubt. So again, a lot of these things are falsehoods and there are real, true, honest facts that you can provide people to help them see something different and educate them. But attacking them based on the fact that you don't understand it is not going to win hearts, minds, or votes. Did I miss anything? Okay. So to drive that point home, I'm going to talk a little bbit about my experience. So I had to do a lot of work with myself um, to get myself to vote for Biden. Because I would have voted for a tuna fish sandwich in this election if it wasn't Donald Trump, to be 1,000% honest with you. So, but I struggled. His handling of Gaza really under any circumstances would have been enough for me not to vote for him. Any other circumstances, it would have been enough for me. And so I really had to talk myself through the fact that I was willing to overlook adamantly not agreeing with this one part for the greater good and because I knew the other option and because I knew that not one single penicillin life was going to be saved by Trump being in office. I had to constantly have that conversation with myself until I could get to myself to the point that I was like, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what we want and this is how it's going to be. I had to work towards it. Trying to figure out if I have to tell my kids to come get these dogs. Okay. They did it anyway. Look at that. Right on call. So yeah, so I had to do a lot of work with myself to get myself to that point. How are we doing on time? Oh, perfect. I had to do a lot of work with myself to get myself to the point that I was okay making that choice to vote for Biden. Like it was intrinsically against the things that I believed, which is not a person I am. I very much stand on principle of things, and so I really had to do some work. And there are people that have to do that same kind of work to get themselves to the point that they're gonna vote for her. And that might seem crazy to some people, but it is the truth based on all the things that we talked about. So, I'm gonna tell you about my experience with this situation so far to kinda give you a little bit more, personal perspective to that. I have cried more since she has announced her candidacy than I remember crying in a very, very long time, for good reasons, for bad reasons. When I think about the idea of a Black woman being the president, it is so overwhelmingly beautiful and exciting for me on the most, like, my eyes are tearing up, on the most intrinsic level. Every time I see a commercial, every time I see a video, every time I think about it, every time I see, like, a older lady or, like, a young child, like, excited, like, looking at her doing something or listening to her, whatever, like, every time I see it, I am so overwhelmed that I'm, like, literally physically sitting there crying every single time. I can also tell you that when she made the announcement, I was instantly terrified. Instantly. I am a queer person and I love enough queer folks and I am embedded enough in the trans community that I know what happened when Trump started his campaign. Hate crimes rose exponentially. Every time he opened his mouth, something terrible happened to someone in this country. Another thing that you may not know is trans folks are killed at any ridiculously alarming rate in this country. Ridiculously alarming rate. Of the trans folks that are killed, they're overwhelmingly Black trans women, like 99%. These murders go uninvestigated, they go unsolved, the media doesn't cover them, the police, the media misgender people, and they're basically looked at as thrown away people that aren't even worth anyone solving their crimes or talking about their deaths. Those are Black women. Black women are the least protected people in this country. And so I was instantly terrified. Okay, thank you so much for coming, Lynn. I was instantly terrified about what this candidacy meant. I started looking for people to start teaching self-defense classes so I could start gathering women to take free self-defense classes because I didn't know what was gonna happen, and the terrible thing is whether she wins or whether she loses, that doesn't go up or down. Because if she loses, people are gonna be angry. If she wins, people are gonna be angry. And it terrifies me. So I had the most overwhelming sense of dread and fear that lived inside of me when she first made her announcement, coupled with incredible excitement and pride and hope for the first time in such a long time. But it was both those things. There were so many tears because it was both those things. And for a lot of the people that you encounter, it is not an easy yes. It's not just being excited about a new opportunity or a not Trump or a not Biden. There's real reasons for people to be afraid and to be proud and excited and terrified. And the only reason I'm sharing that is because I know that I can speak to my own experience more passionately than I can speak to anyone else's. I'm sure there are many other groups, including immigrants and trans people and other queer people, who can say that same kind of thing. But I have constantly been in this up and down of yay and oh my God, what's going to happen next? Constant. And so when you are encountered, so when you decide, okay, yes, like I'm going to push through the fear and I'm going to be a part of this thing and we're going to make this happen and we're going to support each other. And you walk into a room full of people who are just ecstatic and over the moon and look like they're heading to a Taylor Swift concert because they don't have as much to lose. And they also don't have anything to lose if she does win. And there are many of us who still have to live in fear whether she wins or loses. And that's gonna change how public people wanna be in their support. It's gonna change what roles they wanna take in campaigns because their lives might be in danger. When I worked a lot with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests, and there wasn't a protest that we didn't have people set up to, like, walk people to their cars so nothing happened to them. We didn't have a protest where we didn't have a line of white people that stood outside the organizers and the Black folks in the center because we knew that those people wouldn't be beat up or pepper sprayed or arrested or prosecuted as harshly if they got arrested in those protests because it's just the truth of the thing. So if you've never experienced that kind of fear or the need to have those type of protections, you wouldn't even think to build that in to rallies and marches and whatever. Wouldn't even occur to you that you might need security or people prepared to go to jail because you've had the experience of being able to go out there and march and scream and yell, or you've maybe just never had to do that at all. So those are the conversations that aren't being had in those groups and in those meetings because they don't even know they need to. In addition to the fact that it's extremely difficult for me personally, and I'm sure not just me, to go into these rooms with all these people who are now talking about how excited they are about supporting this Black woman to reach the highest office in the nation. But where were you before? When Sandra Bland was killed by the police? When Breonna Taylor was killed in her home? When the woman just the other day was murdered in her kitchen by police that she called because she had water boiling on the stove. If you didn't speak up publicly about any of those things, but all of a sudden you are so excited about getting this Black woman nominated, Sonia Massey, thank you. All of a sudden you are so excited about getting this Black woman nominated. Where have you been? And people may not say that to you, but I promise you they're thinking that. And so all this like fevered excitement and, these rooms that you go in where everybody's, yes, we're going to elect this Black woman and we're going to do this thing or whatever. If you've never in your life spoken up about an issue that specifically affects Black women, there's a cruel, frightening, scary irony there that is missed by a lot of people. And you need to be aware of it. So that is that. I have to like pull myself together now because that topic makes me very emotional because it's real. Like that is a real thing. Like I would like to run a poll in these groups of thousands and thousands of people of what they've ever done to support anyone in the Black community that isn't running for president. I want you to show me a post on your Facebook page about how incredibly vicious it is what they did to Sonia Massey. Okay, thank you for coming. And if you can't show me a Facebook post about what you said about any of those things, it's really hard to take you seriously when you talk about how supportive you want to be of this Black woman. Why? Why her? Why does Kamala Harris mean more than Sonia Massey did? Why does she mean more than Breonna Taylor? Why does she mean more than me? And so when you want people to relate to you and you don't understand why, like I get paid all kinds of money to get brought into organizations where people are like they have like a target audience. It's like the community that they're supposed to be serving that they just can't make a connection and they don't understand why. We've done all these things and we've and they just won't engage with us. Like we don't get it. Like what I don't understand. And for me, I'm like, what have you done and who told you to do it? Like best practice is very rarely best practice. Best practice is usually most commonly used practice. And so where did you even think like did you even talk to any of these groups of people as to why they don't engage with this agency? Chances are it's generations or years worth of hurt and damage and harm that have been committed against them that they don't trust it anymore. So you can't all of a sudden just assume or expect people to trust you if you just showed up yesterday. It doesn't mean that they won't in time, but there is a sense that you have to earn it to some degree because where have you been when all these other things have been happening? Were you sitting in your living room thinking, "Oh, that's terrible. That's awful. That should never have happened. That's awful." But never been public and vocal in your community or amongst your friends or on your social media because you didn't want to alienate the people that you know and they might not feel the same way. But now all of a sudden everybody you know is super excited about this election, so now it's okay. It feels very cheap. Feels very cheap. So again, just something to make you aware of. Okay, so that is pretty much um all of the content. Where are we at? Oh, perfect timing. It's amazing how this always works on perfect timing. So that's pretty much all like the content that I want to give you, like all the heavy like information. Now I just want to kind of give you a few things to kind of take with you, and then I'm just gonna stop talking and give everybody the opportunity to say whatever, ask whatever questions, whatever. Okay. So number one in this thing is knowing it. Like you may have seen, not known some of the things that I talked about tonight. And so educating yourself is a huge part to this. Taking the opportunity to educate yourself, to know Google searches, talking to people, reading books, figuring stuff out. Like I said, I'm going to send you a long book list of different things and give you different information so you can bone up on things. Um, it's huge. The second really big part of it is acknowledging it. It is amazing how far just saying the thing goes with any community that you interact with. Even if it's scary, even if you feel like it's gonna make you look bad, even if it's whatever, received not received well. I've never been in a community with Black women before. I don't know. I wanna get better. Please help me understand. Help me show me how to educate you. I know that I've done things that have not been supportive in the past, but that's not who I am anymore, and I want it to be different. I understand that what just happened to you was a microaggression. Because again, back to that part where we were talking about being that one person in the room, you have no idea how much it means when you're that one person in the room to have somebody else say something to defend you or just to say that it really happened, especially when people are telling you that something didn't happen. Like the dog whistle complex is a really big thing right now where like you say something that like at face value doesn't seem like it's racist or a microaggression, but like there's like underlying context to it, so it really is. So like that's why it's called a dog whistle because like only dogs can hear it. So like other people, the people that you're offending know what you mean, whereas the rest of the room may not understand it. If all the people in the rest of the room look like you, none of them may get it. So now all of a sudden you're the enemy because they don't understand what the problem is, where something very real just happened to you because you understand the context and the meaning behind what they were saying. So like being the one person that sees it and is like, whoop, that was a microaggression. Because the honest to God truth is, if somebody experienced it, that means it happened. For them, that's what they experienced. They don't need to justify it. They don't need to back it up. They don't need to, because overwhelmingly, people do not believe Black women in sexual assault, in court cases, all of the things. In the last workshop, somebody brought up Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill because they, for some reason, had like I can't remember why she said she had such a strong attachment to that case. I think she was like in DC when it was happening or whatever. Like, there was some reason she had a very strong attachment to that case, and she said that she personally struggled significantly with who to believe. Because on one hand, she had been a sexual assault survivor, and so she understood the trauma of that and how heavy it is and what it means, but she also had so much respect for this first Black man in this office, and he's a Supreme Court judge, and of course he wouldn't do these things and whatever, and so she didn't know who to believe. And I said, "Okay, so, like, let's break that down a little bit. If we're talking about, like, a court case, like, there's evidence, people testify, somebody, a judge, 12 peers make a decision, that's a different thing. Like, that is deciding who to believe, but that's not for you. Like, that's for the people in the court to figure out. Because in reality, nobody knows between those 2 people what happened but between those 2 people, and the court somehow is gonna have to figure out how they're gonna decide what's true and what's false. Believing someone is simply when they tell you something happened, listening to their story, not jumping to any sort of conclusion as to why or what the reason is, because if you wouldn't jump to that same conclusion, if she looked like somebody else and you wouldn't be torn on who to listen to, would you even be worried about believing her or whether it was true or false? Or is there stuff in you that's clicking up that's making you feel like you have to decide who's telling the truth? Let the court worry about who's guilty or innocent. Believing someone is when they come to you and share something that you give them the space, the support, the time, the ear, and you trust that they have something important to say. Believing them doesn't have to be about true or false. It's that you don't make them justify what they just told you or prove it or have evidence to back up. When I tell you a lot of the reason that Black women, angry Black women trope is a thing is because we're so used to being not believed that when we say something, we come with all the receipts. We have a list of the reasons. We've written down notes. We know all of the things. We have examples. So a lot of times we're so ready to defend ourselves, mixed with the implicit bias of the trope already existing that we're angry people by nature, that it seems like we're coming with all guns firing when it's just because we're so rarely believed that you gotta come with all your guns ready to go. 'Cause you know you're probably not gonna believe, and you know that if you are gonna be believed, you probably have to prove it. Um, being quiet and listening goes a really long way. There are very few scenarios where white women specifically, but white people in general, are made to be quiet and listen. Like, their opinion or what they have to say doesn't matter and comes last. There's just not a lot of structures that work like that. And so you often don't learn the skill of just being quiet and letting somebody else talk. And it's a great skill to work on. I always say if you're a person that you know you take up a lot of space in the room, you know, be the person that works on very purposefully taking a step back and making sure that the lesser voices are heard. And that isn't always like a personality thing. It may just be like a type. Like if you know that there's been 17 people that look one way, that have spoken, maybe it's time to make sure someone who doesn't look like that says something so that they feel comfortable doing so and welcome to do so. So, like, literally being quiet and listening opposed to talking is a huge is a huge step towards this thing. Um, we kinda just went to the Believe Black Woman thing, that was the next one. Um, the angry Black woman trope, again, I talk about it constantly because it's such a big deal. Like, I was actually in a space I was asked to come into a room of academics where it was all these very higher up, very important folks from universities and academic organizations that were in a room that were all working on a project. And I brought up and literally was there to make sure that equity and diversity was incorporated in the work that we were doing. That was literally the job that I was being paid for to be in that room. And I brought something up that to me was a very clear source of, inequity that should probably be addressed and was argued down. The people in the room absolutely said that that was not true. It did not happen. And then so I had to defend myself against all these academics for about 2 hours. Nobody said a word. Nobody tried to defend me. None of the people in the room who agreed with everything that I was saying said a solitary word. And then when we left that space, that one woman that mostly who ironically interfaced directly with the student population at a very diverse university, then went back and tried to get me fired from the role because she had the power to do that. Thankfully, the person that I had interacted with very much believed in me and my work, and so it didn't happen. But that's often the experience that people have. And I had to shut down the Zoom when it was over and, like, sob because I held it together for those 2 hours, but let me tell you, I was a mess when it was over because it was so scary and so painful. So, like, that's why I, like, beat the whole concept about that black angry black woman trope into everybody that I interface with because it's so destructive, but it's so easy to slip into. Um, Another one, you really have no idea what people's situations are, so just, like, don't assume. Like, we talked about a lot of reasons why people, may or may not support the candidacy, may or may not be interested in participating, may or may not whatever. Just ask them why, let them tell you or not. If you don't trust someone, it's hard to say those things, but also, like, you don't know if people have money to donate. You don't know if they're in the position to do that. You don't know if people work 15-hour shifts, and so they can't show up to volunteer at things. So it may look like they're not pulling their weight, but you have no idea what people's situations are, no matter how great they look or how high their position is or how educated they are or, whatever. They could have a dying parent at home. They could have, just gone through a divorce and are still trying to figure out, like, picking up and dropping off kids, like, you just don't know. So make sure that you save room in your brain for the fact that you're in a room full of people that may have very different life experiences than you, and so you don't know why they aren't doing things. Um, this one is a tough one because a lot of times when I interview someone, my first question is, "What's the difference for you between representation and tokenism?" Because it's always an interesting answer, and it's always a different answer, and it's always enlightening to me. And then I use whatever they say in my work moving forward because it's such a really interesting answer. Because that's why I kinda did the weird face before it because it's hard. Like, you wanna make sure everyone is represented in a space, but you also don't wanna force somebody to be all Black people. Like, we have a room full of you should never be in a room if you're ever in a room where every single person there looks like you're in the wrong room or you need to suggest that the room is different. And how are we gonna make the room different? Like, at this day, in this age, in this country, there should never be a room that everyone you look around at looks like they could be related to you. Absolutely not. And if you are, you need to be the person to say, "Okay, we have a problem here, and we need to figure out what it is, and we need to figure out how to fix it." But with that being said, Black people are many different things. They are queer, they are straight, they are trans, they are parents, they are not parents, they are doctors, they are lawyers, they are criminals, they are preachers, they are nurses, they are all of the things. And so when you have a very small representation of someone in the room, like I do it, even though I always literally when people ask me a question, I'll be like, well, just so we're clear, I'm not all Black people, but I can tell you that da 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 because I want to drive home the point that like you can't expect somebody to be like the answer to all things. Because, like, there's an incredible amount of homophobia in the Black community, so that means a lot of times queer and trans voices of color aren't included in an answer someone might give you. If you're from a super religious background, your answers may be very different than someone else's answers. Like, one person does not represent all of the Black people. So as much as I really want you to make sure that you have as much diversity and the people that you have around you as humanly possible, really resist the impulse to have them answer like, "So do you think Black people would be comfortable with that?" Like, who the hell knows? There's a lot of them. Like, ask more than one of them. So, like, that one's tricky because it's nuanced because, like, yes, yes, have diversity, but also make sure that representation looks more like representation than, like, tokenism. Like, we do not want, like, a Noah's Ark effect here. Like, we need 2 of these and 2 of these and 2 of the like, that's not helpful. You wanna make sure that you are creating an environment and building relationships with people and groups that an entire community of people feel comfortable being there, not just, like, seeking out 1 or 2 to prove that they're there and they exist. And that's tough. That's why a lot of times, like, I'll embed myself in an organization to be able to try to build those relationships, help foster those relationships in order to make the environment, more welcoming to a community in general, opposed to, like, what people usually do, which is, like, find the one Black or brown person or queer person that they have some type of relationship with or have seen in some sort of prominent position and ask them to step in to be the singular representation of that thing. So that's nuance and that's tough and that takes time. In this case, there isn't necessarily much of, but it's something important to keep in mind. Okay, so this is another one of those things that's very closely related. So resist the urge to make every Black or brown person in the room, like, the leader, because you feel like you're being respectful. Like, that's more of a personality thing than anything. Like, yes, it makes sense to have a Black or brown woman sort of the face of something that supports a Black or brown woman, but, like, make sure that person is comfortable and okay with being there and qualified because there are plenty of Black and brown women that are qualified to do every single thing under the sun. But just don't push the one person that you have to be that person if that's just not who they are, what they want to be. And on the other hand, on the other side of that coin, make sure that you're paying attention to who you are pushing into leadership roles. If you have a group of very diverse people, all the people who are in charge shouldn't look one way, and all the people that are sort of doing the work and being the soldiers shouldn't look one way. Make sure that that's mixed up. So don't push people to the front, they don't wanna be there, but also don't make sure that all of the roles that sort of get established are also very diverse. Like, the whole group being diverse isn't enough. Make sure that there's leadership and not and let it be based on people's qualifications and their interest level, not their demographics. This one. This mm. We kinda already covered this a lot, so I'm not gonna go into this much, but, like, not assuming, not telling people, like, what to think or, like, people really jump on you. Like, if you don't immediately aren't like, "Yes, I'm doing it," like, people really, like, jump on you. Really try to help, and I don't have any reason to think any of you would do such a thing, but you'll see it, and really try to help people understand how that's not helpful based on all the things that you know and all the things that you learn. Like, it's not helpful. And then this is probably the biggest thing, and I've said it in a little bit different ways, and I don't have to say it as dramatically as I did with the first workshop that I feel like we didn't get into it as much as we did in this one in other ways. But like, call stuff out when you see it. Like, if you see something racist happening within the organization, like, say it. You have to get past potentially hurting people's feelings because in reality, like, they're hurting somebody else's feelings. So fix it. Like, say the thing. It goes with that acknowledgement piece. Like, if you see it, say something, and then there's an opportunity to change it, because you saying it is gonna mean something so much different than that person having to say it. All of a sudden, the resistance looks different when you say, "That might have been a microaggression." So, like, mm, it looks so much different when you say it than if I say, "That was microaggression." Now, mind you, like I said, I do this work, so nobody scares me. Like, whatever, we can duke it out. But everybody doesn't have that experience, and if they're already in a room that they're not totally comfortable in, like, it's really hard to be that person. So be the person. Like, what is the person gonna do? Get mad? Okay, great. Like, alright, you're welcome to be mad, but let's do better about that next time and make sure that we are, paying attention. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes, but with that being said, I can stay as long as anybody needs to stay to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Because we actually went like about 15 minutes longer than I went with the first workshop, so it doesn't leave as much time. But now, any questions you might have, anything you want to say or comment, or situations that you've encountered that you want to talk through, anything at all, the floor is 100% yours. Raise your hand, type in the chat, shout it out, whatever you're comfortable with.
Hi, it's Nikki. I'll only take a
Hi.
second because I'm driving.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, but I just wanted to say thank you for hosting this space and for sharing your time and your expertise and your energy. I definitely learned a lot,
Good.
and I'm glad that I am continuing to learn all the time, and
What
that's
it's
my
about.
goal. I
What it's about.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, I am excited that we had this opportunity as white folks to learn directly from a Black woman to see how we can be better supports for you all and better allies. So thank you again.
No, of course. Thank you for being here. This is a scary thing. Like, it does not miss me. I mean, and that sounds like, patronizing almost, but I promise you it isn't. Like, it's not lost on me that it's really scary to put yourself in the vulnerable position to say, like, I don't know about this thing. Like, can you talk to me about it? Like, that's why I always tell people, like, please understand that I am the person that you can literally ask the question to that you're scared to ask in other spaces. I am not going to be offended. I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to be hurt. And if by chance I am, I also have the tools to like mend that for myself that people in the world may not have learned because I do this work. And so I have to learn how to move past these things or move through them and, whatever. Also have a great therapist, which is awesome. But, I know that this is scary. Like, this is scary stuff. And nobody wants to be that person, right? Like, nobody wants to be that person to look like they're this or that or say the wrong thing. Nobody wants to be that person. So it is certainly not lost on me the amount of vulnerability it takes to even be in the room. So I am very appreciative of you as well. Hmm. Are you muted? They
Trying to
moved
unmute.
they moved the mute
It's
too.
like, it's there, it's there. Everything that Nikki said, thank you. I had no idea what we would be doing in this time together, and I've learned a lot. And um, I mean, a lot of this I really didn't know.
It's great. That's
You
great.
know, the pearls, for example.
Mm.
Um, I haven't also either. I haven't said, "Oh, Pearl's Ruth Bader Ginsburg"
Yeah, yeah,
either.
yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
like, "Oh, people think that's a thing." Oh, well, it's not. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so when I was sort of getting ready for our time here together, I did a little bit of deep breathing. Like, all right, prepare to be really, really uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to thank you that it was uncomfortable and not in a
Scary. Scary way.
yeah, because to your point about not attacking people,
Mhm.
you know, it's scary to ask
It
questions,
is.
and I really appreciate your style. You're really good at this. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you.
I have a question about pearls,
Okay.
if it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I know I'm not gonna go out there and be wearing AKA colors because I am not in that sorority. That
Right.
is not for me.
Right.
What about Chucks and Pearls?
So this is actually a really interesting question that I've actually given a lot of thought to myself. Because like I've actually researched thoroughly to try to figure out what the Converse thing is for her because I was trying to figure out if there was origins to that. Because I've actually honestly seen more about the Converse and people like gearing up to order and where do you order from and what site and whatever than even the pearls part. So I have researched extensively and I can't see anything. I think she just wants to have cute shoes so that she's not in heels at these things. So I really think that
Yeah.
that one is
I
free
did the
reign.
same thing, and I think it's California too, kind
Mhm.
of like old school, like
Yep, 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 yep.
California. Yeah.
Yep, very
Okay.
skateboardy and the whole business. So
And
I researched
comfy. Yeah.
right, right. I researched that a lot. I don't see a
Okay.
single thing that there's any sort of like cultural or specific like emotional reason for the Converse. So I would say the Converse are free reign.
Mhm.
Um I would say, and this is again just a me thing opposed to everybody, because some people may feel differently. Since pearls have such universal definition, like a lot of like appropriation is a thing. Like the amount of things that come from Black culture that people or Black and brown culture that people don't realize are sourced there. Like I see articles all the time where people like this person invented this new thing, and it's like this thing that we've done for 300 years or whatever, and it's like wow. Um, so that's pearls are one of those things that I don't think that that's true. There is significance to a lot of people. Yes, like breakdancing in the Olympics, for example. Um, there's a lot of things that a lot of cultural reasons and every culture that I found has some different significance for pearls and why they're meaningful. Um, and I think for a lot of people, especially since Ruth passed, that is their connection to pearls and it's meaningful. And I think that's okay too. I think the biggest part is just knowing. Like, I think that knowing why she wears them and having reverence and respect for it and speaking that goes a long way. Because, like I said, I've honestly given it a lot of thought too. Like, do I feel like it's offensive? I don't, because I think that it's amazing. Like, if I went to a rally or a march or something and saw a little girl with blonde hair with Converse and pearls on, I think I would probably sob because it's just the sweetest thing that someone different finds inspiration in this person and this movement and this thing. So, like I said, other people may feel differently about it. For me, I think it's less about doing it than understanding the history of it for her and speaking that. Saying, I'm she wears pearls because she's an AKA and that has incredible significance for her. I wear pearls because my grandmother would be thrilled to see this thing happening. She was huge in the movement in the 70s and it meant so much to her and she wore pearls every day. So I'm going to be out there in these pearls out of respect for her and out of remembrance of my grandmother, and I think that's beautiful. I really think that the heart of it comes more in the knowing, because I have to say, like, seeing people talk about all these different reasons why she does it is absolutely obnoxious to me. It really upsets me because you can find that information. Like it's readily available if you look for it. Um, but I think the symbolism of it is so important, and like the idea of, like, pearls being so strong and yet still so dainty, like, representing, like, the different sides of intricacies of feminism. I think that there's a lot of symbolism there that is very much across the board and very appropriate to this movement and all of these things. I think the biggest thing is just knowing it and saying it. Like, I would love to see people across the country putting up posts saying, like, "She's an AKA, I'm not an AKA, but this is why it means something to me. I watched Ruth get sworn in, or I sobbed at her funeral and told myself that I was going to continue this fight on her behalf. And so I will wear these every day on behalf of both of them." Like, I think that because you don't know, but a whole bunch of other people probably don't either that you know. So, like, you putting up a post like that is meaningful. You've now educated people about something that they probably don't know, in addition to the fact that you're supporting the movement and you've made it personal for you. So I think a lot of it, like, I think that there would be a lot less upset about appropriation if people acknowledged why they were doing it and where it came from originally. I think
Mhm.
a lot of it is like it feels like a culture vulture thing where like you're stealing something, you're taking something away from a people that have already had so many things taken away from them. And that feels so violent.
Mhm.
Whereas being able to stand where you are in your shoes from your space, being able to show respect and reverence and appreciation for her history and her culture and her reasoning for doing things, but also attaching yourself to it in a meaningful way, I think that's beautiful. So
Mhm,
again, other people may tell you something different, but for me, that's how I feel. Like, as long as you know and you articulate that, I
mhm.
don't see anything wrong with it. And then the converse are probably free reign.
And that layer of, I learned something today.
Yeah,
You didn't know
yeah,
this. Yeah, whatever
absolutely.
it is. Like,
Absolutely,
I learned
absolutely.
this and I'm not gonna keep doing it.
Yeah.
Or mhm.
Yep, yep.
Thank you.
And
Thank
then
you.
some people might hear the story and be like, "Oh, I didn't realize that was for, like, I'm not gonna touch it," and that's fine too. But, like, now you've educated them and they can make that decision for themselves. But I just think it's about, like, doing it in a respectful, meaningful kind of way and making it, true for you and whatever. So, like I said, I wouldn't say that's the gospel because other people may feel differently, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
I have a lot more to reflect on, much bigger things than pearls, but that was something in the moment I wanted to
Good.
ask.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
important though, but I feel like that's important, and that's why I always try to leave as much time as possible for questions because, like, that seems insignificant, but it's not really. Like, that's a visible representation of the stuff you learned in this space. Like, the fact that you would even go back and reflect on that, that means, like, all the things that we talked about were relevant to you and meant something, and maybe that's the only way that you can physically show that sort of change in perspective, but, like, that's okay, and I think that that's just as important, maybe even more so because more people are gonna see those pearls on you and hear your explanation than are gonna know, the things that are rattling around in your head now.
Okay, first, can I say that my sorority, by the time I joined it, did let everybody in. It took a while
Good.
before people came in, but absolutely all the white sororities did not, and you had to be white. You
Oh,
couldn't,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I think I think Cornell gave up their charter for my sorority in the 60s because they tried to let in a Puerto Rican girl and National gave them a hard time and they said, okay, screw you, and
Good for
left. So,
them.
good for
Good
Cornell,
for
right?
them. Right.
Um, they came back eventually, but only after. But the point is, I just want you to know I did not join while it was an exclusive group.
Fair.
Um, but I also, in the sororities, it's really interesting. When I found out she was AKA, I was like, oh, well, that makes so much sense because my
Doesn't it?
experience with Black sororities is that sisterhood does really transcend college
Oh, yeah.
more than white sororities. I mean, absolutely, Tri-Delt in some cities will raise thousands of dollars a
Yeah,
year. There's a lot of groups that do this, but the Black sororities are out there marching for candidates in parades.
that's right.
I see them registering kids in Black schools. It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
So when
It
I
is.
found out she was AKA, I was like, oh well,
Yeah.
that makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely does.
That was
Um,
honestly the first thing that made me feel like she might really get elected. Like, when I started to see the sororities and fraternities showing up, I was like, "Oh,
oh,
we might be
okay,
onto something here." Like,
yeah.
that's incredible because there's just so many people. Like, it's
Well, and what you've got there is this really big, active, united force of
yep.
educated people. I mean, you're only in those groups
That's
because
used to
you went to
organizing.
college.
Right, that's used to
You know,
organizing. Like,
yeah,
they're used to organizing. Yeah.
they're used to
Mhm.
organizing. They're used to working together, and they all went to college.
Yeah.
These
Yep.
are educated, powerful people that with skills. So yeah, it's that's a really good thing. It's a wonderful thing. I will say that for me, the Black and Indian, the woman thing is pretty important. I think that's great. But I just was thrilled that there was a candidate that I thought could win. And like I, she's smart.
Yes.
She's really smart. She's pretty, which let's face it, when you're a woman,
Pretty privilege is a thing.
it is.
It is a
It is.
thing.
And she really is.
She's
She's a
beautiful.
beautiful
Yeah,
woman that
beautiful.
matters, really matters. She looks young, in America that matters. So I just thought, wow, this woman could actually win. This is fantastic.
Mhm.
But and I'm not claiming to be colorblind. I'm not a colorblind person. I see people and all of that. It's just that is the less important thing to me about her, as
Mhm.
opposed to that I think she's eminently qualified and could win. Um,
Yeah, and
honestly,
and that means you got exactly the point that I was making. Like, everybody will come to this for a different reason.
yeah.
Like, and it's as varied of reasons as there are people. And I think since your reason is probably a little less specific, maybe it doesn't feel like the right way to say it, but I think you know what I mean. Like since it's less I don't know, less specific is what's popping in my
Yeah,
head,
right.
that
Right.
it at the same time is more inclusive of other people coming for less specific reasons. Um, but there are a lot of people that have come to this point for very, very specific reasons.
Yep.
And so being able to acknowledge both
Yes.
and
Yes.
understand and because I think that you see that's different. Like for some people, like you, since that reasoning for you is different than a lot of people's, like you clearly already see that. And I think that that's the biggest, hurdle to climb because some
Yes.
people are coming to it. Okay, thank you so much, Nikki. If you have any questions you didn't get to ask, oh, she's gone. Feel free to email
Yeah.
me. Um, so yeah, I think that since your reasoning is a little broader, that's better, broader. As a broader reason, that it's easier for you to see like the different things. Yes, your why is not everybody's why. And so I see people that are like especially super like the pro row that's literally all they see. Like which I'm a
It,
woman, I
it,
completely understand. Like, I get it. I
pretty
absolutely
major.
get it.
That's pretty major. Yep.
I
My
get it.
daughter is still of childbearing age.
I'm telling you.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you.
Major.
And like, I really had thought, because I love politics. Like, it's so interesting to me. So, like, I really thought when everything happened with Roe, that was going to be the galvanizing force to make people be like, oh my God, we haven't been paying enough attention. We got to do better. And it didn't, it was like ripples, but it wasn't the huge, like, I thought that was going to be the thing. Like,
I
I
know.
thought everybody was going to mobilize and organize and whatever. And it really wasn't. And I was shocked. It turns out that this seems to be the thing. And so the people that I've seen that are specifically super supportive of the candidacy only because of Roe are the ones that I've seen that are the most like sort of militant about her being elected, which isn't a bad thing as long as you understand that, like you said, your why isn't everybody's why.
Mhm.
And that issue may not be the most quintessential to your existence. Like, if you're a trans person and you have real fear for your life, like, people will die if there's not access to reproductive health
Right.
and abortions. People will die. So that is
Yeah.
also a life and death issue. However, if you fear going outside because someone may murder you, that is a much more direct life or death issue
Yeah.
than
Right.
abortion
Yes.
rights. And
Yes. That's true.
so if you feel like Trump clearly isn't supportive of trans rights, she's iffy on trans rights, there's no hope and I'm going to sit this one out, like that's a real thing. And so if you're someone who's supportive of Roe and you know for a fact that this win or loss is going to change the dynamics of whether there are abortion rights and reproductive rights and all women's rights in general at this point,
Mhm.
there's no questions. Like this is an absolute yes, no questions asked, all guns forward, let's do this, whatever. But there are people whose lives get affected in very different ways, and they may be women just like you. And so it may be very difficult for you to see people taking a pause and not understanding why. It also gets in that weird spaces where cis women and trans women seem like they're in opposition to things and it becomes this weird battle between who's a real woman and who's not a real woman and whatever, which is all just made up constructs of gender that don't exist because Roe may not be as much of an issue for you, whereas trans rights may be the number one issue for you. It's just so incredibly important to be able to take your blinders off and understand that your why might not be everybody's why, but there's room for education there, there's room for conversation, but you can't just like jump down people's throats if it's not like an automatic yes for them like it would be for you. Like I said,
I
some things with this election, if she gets elected, that solves their problem. Like whatever their
yes.
major issue
Yeah.
is, like this solves it and then it's over. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people that no matter who wins, those things are not going to end for them regardless of who gets elected. And it's just really important to remember that.
Tamara,
And
could I ask, do you think that's the you've highlighted that in your mind. Do you think that's one of the biggest things that is working against her?
I don't think it's the biggest. I honestly think the biggest is her well, what I think is the biggest is her legislative record and her voting record in California.
Okay.
Because it's become such a clickbait type of answer and people aren't fully educated around it. So I really did research. Like I said, I had to battle my way into being willing to vote for Biden. And although I was super excited to this, I really had to battle my way to be all the way fully 100% committed to this as well. And if you read through, like there's clickbait stuff going around about how she was prosecuting parents of truant kids out in California, which disproportionately affects Black and brown communities so much more, and poor communities in general. There was a man that was on death row that there was significant evidence to prove that he was innocent, that she opted to not support him getting a retrial or being released.
Mm.
Um, that is a big deal to people who care about justice and Black lives and etc. Um, and there's been several other legislate she her conviction rate and how hard she prosecuted people who were charged with marijuana offenses. Again, the things you hear Trump talking about are the things that have come out of the Black community, and there's concerns there. And so um, as part of that is also the fact that in terms of the trans community, she did not support legislation that allowed incarcerated trans people to get gender affirming medical health care and medication. And she also voted against protections for sex workers. That is also a really big topic
Oh.
of advocacy in a lot of the trans communities, because a lot of people are in the position as trans folks that the only way that they're able to survive is through sex work. And
Mhm.
so I don't know that it's any one of those singular things that is the thing, but people know about those things and they're talking about it. And then Trump's bringing it up, so it's circulating.
Mm.
And so I think that her legislative record, in addition to her association with Biden and what's going on in Gaza, I think all three of those things are struggle points for people. And I think that like again, I think that there's room for education around the other things, because what people also don't know is she didn't even get supported by the police union when she ran in California, because she had opted to not seek capital murder against a gang member who killed a police officer. She only went, so that took the death penalty off the table, and the police were pissed. And so she didn't even have union support. So, like, to sort of tag her as the top cop, and, she was so horrible to the Black community, because it's tough. A lot of times politicians only look for Black people when it's time to vote. And then once they get in office, they disappear. And that's not the presidency, it's local offices, it's judges, it's representatives of every sort. And so, when Trump is sort of introducing these narratives of, well, she's not even really Black and she never claimed being Black, and, she's never been supportive of the Black community. When he introduced those narratives, and then, there's evidence to back up some of those things in terms of, yes, she is biracial, and yes, she was the attorney general, and yes, she was the DA, and yes, she did do these policies, but she also created a bunch of policies to redirect youthful offenders out of the criminal justice system, to keep them from being in the adult criminal justice system. There's a lot of things she also did and she also was one of the first people and one of the only major politicians that spoke up when Michael Brown was murdered by the police. So, like, there's counterpoints to all those things, but you don't necessarily hear those, and you have to look for them to find them. And so, I don't know that it's any one thing, but I don't think many people will vote for Trump because of those things, because they don't like or believe him either, but they might sit it out. And,
which is still bad.
which is still bad. So
Mhm.
I don't think that I think that I pray that she has really smart people around her that have their ear to the ground. And so she will systematically address a lot of those things. The fact that I see her She has Miss Major. Like I said, we're interviewing Miss Major in a couple days, and she is a trans icon that's been around since Stonewall and the beginning of the LGBTQ rights movement, and she's a very big deal. And she's going to be at the convention. She's bringing her to the convention next week, and so that makes me hopeful that she knows those things and that she will do things to publicly address those things to make them not as much of an issue, but right now that hasn't really started yet. So I think those things aren't necessarily the thing that will make somebody go right, because I think you have to be a certain sort of person at this point in life and history to go completely right and vote for Trump. But I think that it's what will make people sit it out, which is almost just as bad.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And for me, enraging, absolutely enraging, because I keep
yeah,
thinking, you will get Trump. He is
right,
worse in every way. I don't
right.
care about these little things. He is worse in every way.
Yeah, yeah,
Are you freaking kidding me? So yeah, no, it makes me nuts.
yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be very helpful. I wanted to tell you because I do a lot of phone banking,
Oh, great. That's,
and
yeah,
so
this is huge.
this is going to be really really helpful with my phone banking.
Absolutely.
Um, I can ask you a Black person question actually. So the other day I was on a phone banking call, and the young woman in Georgia identified herself as an African American. She said, I'm an African American woman. She was talking about her triple, because she was Black, a woman, and young, and so she had ageism too. So
Yeah,
she was getting bigotry all over the freaking place.
yeah.
Um, but so if someone calls themselves African American, then I should use African American if I say it in conversation, right? And if they say Black, I should say Black. But if I'm the first person to say it, is it okay if I say Black? Because that's what I usually say.
So that's interesting because I feel like that's one of those things that sort of switches over generations. Like, it went from like Negro to or color
Mm-hmm.
to Negro to African American, and now the emergence of Black has kind of kicked in because a lot of Black folks in this country just don't feel an attachment to America because of all of the things,
Sure.
which I completely understand. And I personally, my preference is Black. Um, it won't be everyone's. So that's kind of a luck of the draw type of thing. I think that most Black folks know that if you're looking at a form, you're more likely to see African American. You also can say African American or Black in the case, like give people the option or ask them, what's your preference, African American or
Mm-hmm.
Black?
Okay.
And then go from there. Like there's nothing, people will not be mad if you ask. It's like when with pronouns. Like you know, if someone asks you, right, if someone asks me my pronoun, like I'm excited because that means they know enough to ask me what my pronoun is. But some people will be offended if you ask their pronoun because they think that that means something strange or that you
Uh,
don't know what gender they are, whatever. And I kind of look at it as the same kind of toss up, like depending on how bad of a day someone's had and how they're feeling about the conversation, you will probably get different responses. But I don't think that there's any reason you can't ask. I think that what you do as far as modeling people is a great idea. If you can somehow find a way to ask the question open-ended, about like what you identify, how you identify, like how do you racially identify, and then let them answer, opposed to necessarily picking one or the other. I would say that's ideal. Okay, thank you so much. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email me, okay?
So appreciate this time.
Oh,
Thank you.
no, thank you so
Thank
much for
you. All right.
coming.
Bye, Jenny.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
So yeah, I would say what you're
I mean,
doing is awesome.
it's not something that I ever would ask in a question, and I don't like. I don't bring it up. It's
Yeah.
only if someone identifies to me on the
Yeah, I
phone,
think what you're
like she did.
doing is perfect. Like the fact I would just mirror whatever they say.
Yep.
Like
And then
that, I think that is an awesome way to do it.
that's what you do. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
That's what I think.
I think that's a great way to do it. Because I don't think either one is offensive. Because I think a lot of times people say the answer they think that you're familiar with.
It could have been, sure.
You know what I
Because
mean?
she was
Like,
young.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So and then some people, like, I think it's also regional to a large
Sure.
degree. Like, I use queer almost exclusively, but I'm from New York. So in Florida, queer is not a thing. Like, they have not gotten to the point that queer is not offensive, and so I often have to, like, qualify the statement and explain why I use it, and that we often use queer instead of LGBTQ and whatever, where I'm from,
Mhm.
because regionally, it's different, and so the South tends to move a little slower and everything than up north does, cultural, like, language and stuff. Um, so I think that there's a decent possibility that since I think you said she was from Georgia, that they,
She was
you
in
know,
Georgia.
that it
Mhm.
might not be as widely, like, the African American may be more comfortably used, but, like, mirroring it is the best thing, because then whatever you said, they can't be offended if you just said what they said. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to handle it.
So okay, that's good. Well, I will tell you one more thing. So
Mm.
my sister and I were not able to have children. So my daughter, who is bi, is from Guatemala. So I have a Latina
Ah,
daughter. My sister adopted biracial twins from Florida, actually.
really?
And this is a really terrible thing to know about America, that biracial infants are harder to place.
Yes, it's true.
Um, and so she had her choice of birth mothers, actually. And so she took twins because she said, well, I was always good at getting bargains, so I got two.
2 for 1? That's awesome.
So yeah, and they're lovely. They're in college now.
Oh, that's great.
Which is really nice. So that's my nephews. My brother has 4 kids, and my one niece is gay. She's lesbian. She's in a relationship. She's in her 30s.
Yeah.
And my nephew was assigned female at birth. I guess that's what you say
Yeah,
now,
nope,
right?
that's
And
perfect.
I hardly see him, so it's very difficult for me to remember
The pronouns.
this.
Yeah. Mhm.
He lives in a different city, but nevertheless, so we have a trans person in our family.
That's
We've
awesome.
gay, we've bi.
So yours
you
is
know,
very intersectional all over the place. But you know what a great hint is with the pronouns? Because I can see why that would be hard if it's somebody that you don't like get in the process
what
doing it.
don't I forget? I forget
You
what to call
actually
him.
you actually can completely remove pronouns from your vocabulary. If you know someone's name, or if you ask them, if it's even like a stranger, if you ask the name, you can always use a name instead of a pronoun. And that you can practice all the time. Like anybody that you talk to, take out the she, his, hers, whatever, and just use a name. That's something that you could practice all the time with everybody. And then with them, you already are ahead of the curve because then you're just using their name instead of a pronoun.
That's really smart, because when you're talking to them, they're you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's not an issue, because
Yep.
it's not
Yep.
gendered. So it's only
Yep.
when you're talking about them,
Yep.
that's really clever.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
true. Like we the English language relies really hard on pronouns, which is why it's so ironic that there's so much controversy around it. But we rely
And
really hard on pronouns, and you don't have to. Like you literally could never say another pronoun for the rest of your days and be able to speak perfect English. So I tell that to like grandmas, because sometimes grandmas, like older grandmas, like really struggle with the pronoun thing. And like my ex is trans, and so his grandma literally always calls him by his nickname, like Tootie, or you know what I'm saying? Like they
sure,
always, because it's just difficult for her in the second to like, and if she does it, she realizes it immediately and then tries to fix it. But
sure.
to avoid it, like she literally always calls them their nickname, and then she never has to worry about like remembering, because it's also awkward if like you're trying so hard to remember that like you go to talk about them and then you're like searching, like you can see
You're
somebody thinking about like trying to say the right thing, like that's also uncomfortable. So if you just
mhm.
remove them all together, and like I said, that's then something you can practice with everybody. So then it never, it doesn't feel like something you only do once every 6 months or whatever at the family
Right.
reunion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, right. No, definitely. Look, I'm gonna let you go because you have kids and dogs and stuff. I have a dog here too on my bed right here. And
I'm
and
amazed they didn't bark through the whole thing. It's
I
awesome.
know,
They
right?
get treats and all kinds of stuff after I get off of here.
But seriously, I really do think this is going to help when it's given me a lot of
Great.
just really good information for the phone banking. Um, Not so much for canvassing, because mainly, it's white people.
Yeah, yeah.
When I'm canvassing, for the most part, but not always. Not always. I do go into Rochester.
Okay.
I lit drop in Rochester. I go up to Rochester. So
Yeah, yeah.
so I will go up there.
Well, maybe it'll help you at Wegmans.
But but it definitely is going to help, you know, in this campaign. But it did make me feel good that I thought, you know, I don't do that stuff. I actually don't do that stuff.
No, and that's good. And there is like the thing about it is like a lot of this stuff is just stuff you don't think about. And so that means you might bring your attention to stuff you do already and things that you can do. And like once you hear it once, you'll be so much more cognizant of it that you'll stop doing the other things too. So like it
Yeah,
really that's why acknowledging it and talking about it is so important because it really does make it easier to put into practice when you have conversation about it.
yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. No, thank you very, very much. Like I said, this was absolutely worth
Oh, thank
e-
you. Thank you.
every
Thank you. Thank
every penny,
you.
every minute. Absolutely worth it. You are great. I think it was Tamara who said, I think it was who said in our chats that she said, "Oh no, she's really great. I know about her." And I was like, oh,
Oh,
okay,
yeah, they're
I'm
awesome.
gonna sign up.
They're awesome. Well, thank you. And like I said, like I told everybody, I'm gonna tell you again though, if you think of anything later, anything comes up, my thing was in the chat, like please feel free to send me an email.
Thank you so much.
You
Thank
have
you,
a
and have
good
a great
night.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye bye.